Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here among such distinguished participants, members of parliament, current and former dignitaries, and such eloquent speakers before me. I am very keenly aware that I stand between you and lunch, and also that we are in a warm room. So I will rely a lot on what has been said before and make reference to it, and rather give you some anecdotes or some practical examples coming from experience about how disinformation undermines democracy and why it is important for us to be aware of it and to fight it. I find it very, very surprising when people do not recognize that we live in an era where we have a global standoff between democratic systems and autocratic systems. If you want a proof that there is such an actual standoff, then come to Moldova and witness it. In Moldova, one of the characteristics of our political system is that the right and the left is not defined by views on economic policy, social policy, or the role of the state, but rather it is defined by whether it is pro-European or pro-Russian, whether it stands for sort of freedom, democracy, human rights, and the values that define our European way of life, and the system that existed in the Soviet Union that many people feel nostalgic about, and they are bought into this autocratic Russian world. So, in fact, in Moldova, throughout its 30-year history, we have had this standoff between what I call the past and the future, the old and the new, the cruel and the hopeful. And we have seen this sort of meddling, particularly by the Russian Federation, throughout the years. When I was in office, I kept telling people, Russia doesn't have to fire an expensive missile in Moldova. What it has to do is actually meddle in our political system and achieve a change of government. And then it can achieve its goals. So we have seen these sort of hybrid war and a weaponization of information for a long time. And I will give you an example to make it sort of practical and interesting. In 2020, as many members of the party that I was part of, we went door to door in Moldovan villages to campaign for current President Maia Sandu. And I remember, we had a platform, we were talking about issues, economy, and so on and so forth. And I went to a village, and as I was walking on a village road, this older lady told me, but Maia Sandu will start a war. And I was thinking, where did that come from? To me, it was very strange. It was not part of any narrative that existed. Then I went to another village. I heard the same. And I heard it from sort of people. It was not in the newspapers. It was not sort of discussed on the national level. And then I asked my colleagues, when you go to villages, do you hear that? And they said, yes, it's very interesting. But, and we figured out that a pro-Russian party, through its local organizations, created this narrative and was spreading it very effectively, particularly among sort of generations that were more likely to believe it. Now, we know that those parties are supported by Russian technologists, political technologists, so-called political technologists. So I wonder if already at the end of 2020, they knew that there would be a war, and they knew whether Maia Sandu wins or loses, they will be able to use this narrative. In October 2020, in October of this year, sorry, on 20th of October this year, we have a very consequential presidential elections and a constitutional referendum to enshrine EU integration as a objective of the country in the constitution. And we can expect these narratives to play a very prominent role in the general sort of information context. But of course, sort of this disinformation and these narratives have risen to a completely different level in February 2022 once the war in Ukraine started. And I saw this especially when we dealt with the refugee crisis. When I was here last time, maybe some of you remember, I talked about how the Moldovan society rose to the occasion and received Ukrainian refugees with open arms. I am very proud of my people. I am very proud that my country managed to receive 5 times more refugees than UNHCR thought we were capable of as a total. And there were many volunteers that contributed to this, the private sector, many sort of families received people in their homes and so on. And I will never forget a conversation that I had with a family of refugees from Kharkiv. There was a family with children, and the man of the family actually told me, you know, I don't only hate Russia for what it's doing in Ukraine. I hate Russia for taking away my mother from me. And he would tell me that his mother, who lives in Belgorod, which is very close, sort of on the border to Kharkiv, would believe what she heard on Russian TV rather than believe him. And he would say, Mom, don't listen what you hear on TV. I am telling you what the Russian troops are doing. I have seen it with my own eyes. And the mother believed the TV rather than believed him. And that relationship was forever lost between a mother and a son. So, and we have seen sort of what TV can do in Moldova, because as soon as we had this refugee crisis after the beginning of the war, and we had many families interacting directly with the refugees, we saw in the polls that the Russian narratives that this was a special operation rather than an invasion, that this was to fight the Nazis in Ukraine and so on, so this outrageous claims, people didn't believe it. But once sort of time passed and the refugee crisis subsided, and these narratives were again and again and again shown on TV, on Telegram channels, on TikTok, and so on, we saw as much as, so opinions move as much as 10 percentage points within 6 months. So these narratives really have an influence. In 2023, experts have estimated that Russia spent about $50 million during the local elections to bribe politicians, pay influencers, pay for advertisement, and for outright voter bribery. These were local elections. As you can understand, in presidential elections and in the referendum for EU integration, we can expect these amounts to increase dramatically. And this is more than our media market can spend. Because we are a small country, you know, we have a limited number of TV stations, particularly, independent media outlets. So this is an unfair fight. And I want to tell you why this is important for democracy. And President Ivanov actually made this point and showed the theoretical evidence. Trust is very important, and so trust and social institutions are very important in democracy. You know, in order for democracy to function well, institutions have to be trustworthy and trusted by the people. And also there is extensive literature that says that trust is very important for economic development. So research has shown a positive association between institutional trust and a range of development indicators, including economic growth, social cohesion, well-being, and the ability of political systems to sustain policy reforms. But what are we seeing in the world? The World Values Survey showed that the share of the global population that believes most people can be trusted fell roughly by 20% in 15 years. A YouGov poll in the UK showed that 2 in 5 people in England, which is 41%, now say that democracy is not working. And people see the biggest threat to democracy as loss of trust, followed by corruption. And if you think about the hybrid war and the weaponization of information, then you should consider that this has been going on for a while. We just chose not to notice it, especially in European countries. So, for example, you know, there have been evidence that Russia has been spending money on anti-vaccination campaigns and funding articles, you know, that goes against science, funding articles that make people believe in sort of these conspiracy theories. And they have learned much earlier than Facebook and YouTube that these negative or this information that plays on negative emotions is actually much better perceived by the human brain. We, of course, now have behavioral research that demonstrates that. And if I mention sort of these technological platforms, then, you know, it is very unfortunate for our democracy that they chose, in order to get clicks, in order to get usage, in order to get time, they chose to prioritize emotions, particularly negative emotions, over truth, over accuracy, over information that is useful to people or educating people. So, you know, and to sort of wake you up a little bit, you know, how many of you think that you have fallen prey to false information? How many of you saw the picture of the Pope in a Balenciaga puffer coat and thought that it actually happened? Do you remember the Pope in a white coat? This was viral. And even BBC, CNN, you know, Financial Times, they had to actually report later that this was a fake. But it became so viral that many legitimate media outlets picked it up. So, and this shows you how quickly we can fall prey to some of these fake news or fakes. And, you know, and it seems, at first sight, it seems, you know, this is not consequential. I mean, the Pope in a white puffer coat. But again, you know, what does it do to the trust that you have in that figure or that institution that the figure represents? And what will you think, you know, later on in a year when you hear an information? You will have that picture in the puffer coat and think, you know, typical, or, you know, to be expected. So, you know, in a sense, we have to be very aware of the impact of the information that we can consume. So what can be done? Moldova is actually one of these places that has been dealing with waves of disinformation and with meddling for a long time, and in some instances it has been ahead of the curve, and it has been sort of a very fertile experimentation ground. And I have to tell you that combating misinformation is really, really difficult. So I told you a little bit about sort of the political spectrum in Moldova, but also, the media spectrum is very much influenced by Russian language media. We have the majority of the population, particularly after a certain age, who are bilingual. They understand both Romanian and Russian, or they speak both Romanian and Russian. And traditionally, there has been a lot of Russian language entertainment. And sort of this is what seems familiar. So, we had a lot of sort of these newscasts by Russian language TV stations and so on. So we closed, in the same day that the European Union took this decision, we closed some Russian language media. But I must say that this pushed a lot of people to alternative channels, like YouTube, Telegram, TikTok, and so on. So rather than watching retransmitted news, they actually watched Russian news. So maybe it even got worse. But we have also had projects that are meant to debunk fakes. So we have an initiative called Stop False. They produce constantly articles that are meant to demonstrate fakes and to give evidence on fakes. Again, I think this is very useful, but then how many people actually read post factum that, oh, this was wrong, and how many this will have the same impact as the original fake news, right? Because it's demonstrated behaviorally that our brain is wired in a way that prioritizes negative news or thinks more about negative news as a tool of protection. I think there is a very, very important role for leadership and government in providing accurate content. So immediately after the war in Ukraine started, we created a Telegram channel called First Source. And there, the aim was to provide accurate information as soon as possible, to be the first. So this channel, within days, became by far the most popular channel because people were afraid and they wanted quick access to accurate information. So for example, when we had parts of missiles fall on the territory of Moldova, the government quickly, within 5 minutes, would give 3 sentences that would give the main facts, the main story, where it fell, was anybody affected, what other authorities doing. So this is very important. And then we also created a Center for Strategic Communication and Combating Disinformation. This center is just starting to work, but there is a legitimate discussion of the trade-off between limiting harmful information and censorship. And I think through experience, we have to find the appropriate balance. But it has an important role in informing and educating the public about these false narratives. And one final thought about what we are doing is, we are thinking very much about the creation of alternative content in the language and cultural context that people understand and find familiar. So just this week, there was the news that one of the most popular Romanian language channels will actually create, so the founders of the channel will also create a Russian language channel so that those who speak Russian and do not speak Romanian have alternative information that they are exposed to, not just the information that is produced by the Russian Federation. Of course, these are sort of actions that we do reactively. But I actually think that we need much more drastic action in order to protect our democracy, in order to protect trust in our institutions, trust between ourselves. And recently I was on a panel with the university professor, policy expert and author Geoff Mulgan, and he has a very interesting analysis on why we should regulate the right to truth. So, when we go, for example, to see a doctor, we expect the doctor to provide us with the information that is based on the most recent, most accurate science. So in the same manner, there should be an obligation for media channels, for politicians, to provide accurate information. So the general idea is to establish the legal framework that would require sort of platforms, governments, media, and other powerful entities to provide information, to involve mechanisms such as fact-checking, accountabilities for spreading misinformation, and potentially legal consequences for deliberate deception. I mean, there is a role here for the justice system, because it's the justice system that actually, in criminal cases, for example, determines, well, what is the truth? What are the facts? How can we apply discernment and judgment? But I do think that it is worth us engaging in that substantive conversation. How do we hold accountable our leaders who lie intentionally? This, in my view, is very, very important for maintaining the health of our democracies and providing a context that is conducive to our European way of life. And I don't mean this just as a geographical term, but I mean this as sort of a system that is based on values of freedom, democracy, human rights, equal economic opportunities, and a potential for everyone to fulfill their potential. So, and one final thought is, I very much enjoyed Minister Filipovic's discussion about gridocracy. We do have to think, how much are we letting sort of the pursuit of profit in our capitalist system to affect other social or the social good. So private sector organizations, in my view, should think, how much are they willing to forego profits in order to maintain our values and our system. This was true when we were talking about energy diversification, but this is also true in terms of, what are we doing to stop misinformation from affecting our democracies? So, I think channels like Facebook, platforms like Facebook and YouTube and Twitter should dedicate resources to engage meaningfully with people who truly understand the context in establishing some discipline and order on the platforms. Because in Moldova, for example, we had people who were sanctioned by the US government create hundreds and thousands of accounts and be the most prominent in advertisement on social media platforms. This is a fight that is very, very difficult to win if you have sort of countries that are non-democratic and are willing to dedicate endless resources to have, undermining the trust in our countries. So how much are we willing to give up in order to protect our values? And are we ready to regulate that people are, and especially our leaders, are accountable for truth? Thank you.